Princess Valath Sarani had spent 3 years studying humans. She had read every report, watched every recording, and memorized every detail about their strange species. Her teachers told her that humans were weak creatures from a small blue planet at the edge of the galaxy. They had soft skin that tore easily. Their bones broke under pressure that would barely scratch a Thyran warrior. They lived short lives, sometimes only 80 or 90 years, which was nothing compared to the 500 years a Thyran could expect. Her advisors called humans persistence predators. This meant that long ago, before humans built their ships and spread across the stars, they hunted by simply following their prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Valath found this amusing. It seemed like such a primitive way to survive. Surely a species that hunted by walking slowly could pose no real threat to the mighty Thyran Dominion. So when the United Earth Coalition sent a single soldier to negotiate for the release of their captured colony ships, Valath nearly laughed out loud. She sat on her elevated throne in the crystalline negotiation chamber, surrounded by her foremost trusted advisors. The walls of the chamber were made of living crystal that responded to her emotions, glowing with soft purple light that matched her royal status. The human entered the chamber alone. She wore simple combat armor that showed signs of wear and use. It was not shiny or impressive like Thyran ceremonial armor. It was practical, built for function rather than beauty. The human carried her helmet under one arm, revealing a face that Valath found difficult to read. The woman appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with short dark hair touched with gray and brown eyes that seemed unremarkable in every way. No guards accompanied her. No diplomats or translators stood at her side. She carried no visible weapons, though Valath's scanners detected a small blade hidden in her boot. The princess found this almost insulting. Did the humans think so little of these negotiations that they sent only one soldier? The human stopped at the center of the chamber and stood at attention. She did not bow. She did not kneel. She simply looked directly at Valath with those plain brown eyes and waited. This was the first moment when Valath felt that something was wrong. Every species in the known galaxy responded to Thyran royalty in predictable ways. The bioluminescent crest on Valath's head could produce light patterns that triggered deep psychological responses in other beings. When she displayed her dominant violet glow, creatures from 17 different species would instinctively lower their eyes and feel the urge to submit. It was not magic or technology. It was simply biology. The Thyrans had evolved to command, and other species had evolved to recognize that command. But this human did not look away. She did not lower her gaze or shift uncomfortably. She simply stood there, watching Valath with calm attention, like someone studying a map before a long journey. "I am Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Coalition," the human said. Her voice was neither loud nor soft. It carried no aggression, but also no fear. "I am here to discuss the colony ships your fleet intercepted in the Helix Corridor." Deleth raised her crest higher, flooding the chamber with intense violet light. The crystals in the walls amplified her display until the entire room pulsed with her dominance. Her 4 advisors, despite being high-ranking Thyrans themselves, shifted slightly under the pressure of her display. Vasquez blinked once. Her pupils grew slightly larger, which was a normal response to bright light. But nothing else changed. Her breathing remained slow and steady. Her posture did not shift, and her heartbeat, which Valath could hear clearly with her sensitive hearing, continued at the same calm rhythm as before. The princess had witnessed many species attempt to resist her influence. Some used drugs to dull their responses. Others wore special equipment to block the light. But this human had nothing. She was simply standing there, unaffected, as if Valath's display meant nothing at all. "Those ships entered Thyran space without permission," Valath said, keeping her voice cold and authoritative. "They are now property of the Dominion, along with everyone aboard." "Those ships carry 40,000 civilians," Vasquez replied. "Families, children. They were traveling to establish a new colony in unclaimed territory. They passed through the Helix Corridor because it was the shortest route. The Helix Corridor belongs to the Dominion." According to the Galactic Concordat, the corridor is disputed territory. Your claim has not been recognized by the Coalition or by the Concordat Council. Valeth felt a flash of irritation. The human was correct about the legal status, but that was not the point. The Dominion took what it wanted. Legal arguments were for weaker species. You speak boldly for someone who stands alone in the heart of our power, Valeth said. She leaned forward on her throne, letting her shadow fall across the human. Do you not understand your position? Vasquez met her gaze without hesitation. I understand it perfectly, Your Highness. I am one human in a room full of beings who could kill me in seconds. I have no weapons that could harm you. I have no army waiting outside. I am completely at your mercy. She paused, and something in her expression shifted. It was not fear. It was not anger. Valeth could not identify what it was, and that bothered her deeply. But I am still here, Vasquez continued, and I will remain here until we reach an agreement. That is my mission, and I will complete it. Lord Kethrin, Veleth's senior advisor, made a sound of disbelief. His scales rippled with barely contained amusement. You will complete it? And how exactly do you plan to do that? We could simply throw you in a cell and ignore your demands entirely. Vasquez turned her head to look at him. The motion was slow and deliberate, and Kethrin suddenly stopped laughing. Something about being the focus of those brown eyes made him uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. You could, Vasquez agreed, but you won't. And why is that? Valeth asked. Because you are curious? The human returned her attention to the princess. You have never met anything like me. You have conquered hundreds of species, and all of them feared you. All of them submitted to your power. But I am standing here looking at you, and I am not afraid. You want to know why? The chamber fell silent. The crystal walls dimmed as Violet's emotional state shifted from dominance to uncertainty. Her advisors exchanged worried glances, unsure how to respond. Valeth stared at the human for a long moment. The wrongness she had felt earlier was growing stronger now. This small, fragile creature should have been terrified. She should have been begging for mercy, or trying to bargain from a position of weakness. Instead, she stood like a rock in a stream, unmoved by the current flowing around her. Very well, Valeth said slowly. Let us talk. Negotiations continued for 3 hours. Valeth made demands. Vasquez listened, considered each one carefully, and then explained why the coalition could not accept them. There was no shouting, no threats, no dramatic displays of emotion. The human simply talked, point by point, with endless patience. When Valeth finally called for a break, she felt something she had rarely experienced in her 200 years of life. She felt tired. Not physically tired, but mentally exhausted in a way that confused her. She had negotiated with dozens of species before. She had broken the will of warriors and kings, but this single human had somehow drained her energy simply by refusing to break. She retreated to a private observation room with Lord Kethrin and her other advisors. Through a one-way window, they could watch Vasquez in the negotiation chamber below. The human had been left alone with no food, no water, and no rest. This was a standard technique the Thyrans used to weaken their opponents. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion would eventually make anyone more cooperative. But Vasquez did not pace or complain or look around for help. She simply sat down in her chair, placed her hands on her knees, and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed to a deep, regular rhythm. She did not appear to be sleeping, but she was clearly conserving her energy. She looked like someone who had done this many times before. She is not responding to any of our techniques, Lord Kethrin said. His voice was troubled, and his scales had turned a pale blue color that indicated stress. We activated the pheromone diffusers when she entered the building. Most species become anxious and submissive within minutes. She showed no reaction at all. Perhaps humans are immune to our pheromones, another advisor suggested. No, the research confirms they are susceptible, Kethrin replied. Their biology should respond to our chemicals just like any other carbon-based life form. But she acts as if they do not exist. Valeth watched the human through the glass. Vasquez had not moved since sitting down. Her stillness was unnatural, almost machine-like. Even Thyran meditation masters would shift occasionally, but this human was perfectly motionless. What about the other techniques? Valeth asked. We tried the subsonic intimidation pulses, another advisor reported. These frequencies cause feelings of dread and fear in nearly all known species. Her heart rate increased by 4 beats per minute for approximately 30 seconds. Then it returned to normal, and she showed no further response. She adapted, Catherine said quietly. Her body felt the fear, and then she simply controlled it. That should not be possible, the advisor protested. These are automatic biological responses. They cannot be controlled. Through willpower alone, and yet she did it. Valeth turned away from the window. Show me her military record again. Everything you have. The data was projected onto the wall. Valeth had seen it before, but now she studied it more carefully. Alina Vasquez. Born on Mars Colony 750 years ago. Enlisted in the Coalition military at age 18. 32 years of active service in some of the most dangerous conflict zones in the galaxy. The record was impressive, but not remarkable. She had received commendations for bravery and skill, but so had thousands of other soldiers. There were no genetic modifications listed, no cybernetic enhancements, no special training that would explain her strange resistance to Thyran influence. Then Valeth noticed an entry she had overlooked before. Deployment record, Kandros Station Siege. Tell me about this, she ordered. Catherine pulled up the file. Kandros Station was a coalition outpost in the Vrix border zone. 5 years ago, Vrix forces surrounded the station and cut off all supply lines. The defenders were expected to fall within days. How many defenders? Originally 200, but most were evacuated through an emergency shuttle before the siege tightened. A small group volunteered to stay behind and hold the station long enough for the evacuation to complete. How small? Kethron hesitated. 12 soldiers, Your Highness? Vasquez was their commanding officer. Valeth felt a strange sensation in her chest. And how long did they hold? 11 days. The room fell silent. Valeth turned back to the window and stared at the human below. 11 days. Without reinforcements? Without supplies? Without rest? 12 humans against an entire Vrix assault force. That is impossible, one of the advisors said. The Vrix are relentless attackers. They would have launched continuous assaults around the clock. No one could stay awake and fighting for 11 days straight. Humans do not need to stay awake continuously, Catherine said slowly. He was reading from the intelligence files, with growing disbelief on his face. Their biology allows them to function with minimal sleep during crisis situations. They can survive on what they call micronaps, brief periods of rest lasting only minutes. It damages their bodies over time, but it allows them to keep functioning long after other species would collapse. For 11 days? Apparently so. Catherine looked up from the data. When reinforcements finally arrived at Kandros Station, they found 9 surviving humans still defending their positions. They had gone beyond all reasonable limits of endurance. Several of them had bones broken from combat, wounds that should have incapacitated them. But they were still fighting. Still defending? Still refusing to give up. Alith watched Vasquez through the glass. The human had not moved. Her eyes remained closed, her breathing steady. She looked peaceful, almost serene. But Valeth now understood what she was looking at. This was not a diplomat or a negotiator. This was a siege weapon. The Coalition had sent someone who could simply wait and wait and wait until the Thyrans gave up or gave in. Someone who had proven that she would hold her position no matter how long it took, no matter how much it cost her. She is not trying to win the negotiation, Valeth said quietly. She is trying to outlast us. That is a foolish strategy, Catherine said, but his voice lacked conviction. We can simply leave her here indefinitely, can we? Valeth gestured at the window. Look at her. She has been denied food and water for hours. She should be showing signs of stress. Instead, she looks like she could sit there for days. No one can go days without water. Humans can survive 3 days without water and 3 weeks without food, another advisor reported, reading from the files. Under optimal conditions, They can extend these limits through careful rationing of their body's resources. And she appears to be entering some kind of conservation state. Valeth thought about what she was seeing. The Thorons had always believed that strength meant overwhelming power, the ability to crush enemies quickly and decisively. But the humans had evolved a different kind of strength. They were not fast or powerful, but they were relentless. They simply did not stop. Through the glass, Vasquez opened her eyes and looked directly at the observation window. She could not possibly see through the one-way glass. But somehow, Valeth felt certain that the human knew exactly where she was standing. And for the first time in her long life, Princess Valeth Serani of the Thyran Dominion felt something very close to fear. The negotiations resumed after a break of 6 hours. Valeth had used the time to eat, rest, and consult with her strategists. She had considered many approaches, from direct intimidation to subtle manipulation. In the end, she decided to try something different. She would talk to this human not as an enemy, but as a puzzle to be solved. When she entered the chamber, she found Vasquez standing exactly where she had been before. The human looked exactly the same as she had 6 hours ago. No signs of hunger or thirst showed on her face. Her uniform was neat, her posture straight, her expression calm. It was as if time had not passed at all. Valeth dismissed her advisors with a gesture. They protested silently with their body language, but they obeyed. Soon the princess and the soldier were alone in the vast crystalline chamber. Sergeant Major Valeth began. "I find myself curious about something." Vasquez inclined her head slightly. "Ask your question, Your Highness." "Why did your coalition send only you? The Helix Corridor is valuable territory. Those colony ships carry thousands of your people. Surely such important matters deserve a larger delegation, more important representatives." Vasquez considered the question for a moment before answering. Her thoughtfulness impressed Valeth despite herself. Most beings rush to fill silence with words, but this human was comfortable with pauses. "Respect," Vasquez said finally. The answer surprised Valeth. "Respect? How is sending one soldier a sign of respect?" "We studied your culture," Vasquez explained. "The Thyran Dominion values individual strength above all else. Your warriors prove their worth through single combat. Your leaders rise to power by demonstrating personal excellence, not by commanding large armies. Sending 100 diplomats would have insulted you. It would have suggested that we did not think you worth the attention of a single worthy opponent." Valeth leaned back on her throne. This was not the answer she had expected. She had assumed that humans sent one soldier because they did not care enough to send more, or because they were too arrogant to take the Thyrans seriously. But this answer showed something different. "You studied us," Valeth repeated. "Yes. For how long?" "My government has been analyzing Thyran culture for 30 years. I personally have spent 2 years preparing for this mission." 2 years? This human had spent 2 years of her short life preparing for a single conversation. Valeth tried to imagine what that kind of dedication would feel like. Thyrans lived for centuries and still rarely showed such focus. "And what did you learn in those 2 years?" Valeth asked. "Many things." Vasquez's expression did not change, but something in her voice shifted. "I learned that the Thyran Dominion has conquered half the galaxy through military force. I learned that your species believes strength is the only virtue that matters. I learned that you view other races as inferior because they submit to your power." "This is true," Valeth acknowledged. "Are you trying to tell me we are wrong?" "I am trying to tell you that we are different." Vasquez took a step forward. It was not threatening, but it was deliberate. She was closing the distance between them, treating the princess as an equal rather than a superior. "Humans do not submit. It is not in our nature. We would rather die than kneel to someone we have not chosen to follow. Many species have said similar things. All of them eventually learned otherwise. Perhaps..." Vasquez took another step. She was now standing at the foot of Velus's elevated throne, looking up at the princess. "But consider this. Every species you have conquered did so because they believed they could not win. They calculated the odds, saw that defeat was certain, and chose survival over resistance. Submission was the logical choice. And humans are too stupid to make logical choices? Vasquez smiled. It was a small expression, barely visible, but it transformed her plain face into something almost warm. Humans are too stubborn to make logical choices. We do not fight because we believe we will win. We fight because we believe the fighting matters. The outcome is secondary to the act itself. Valeth found herself leaning forward, genuinely interested. That makes no sense. What is the point of fighting if you cannot win? The point is that we tried. Vasquez's voice was quiet but filled with conviction. The point is that we did not give up. The point is that whoever comes after us will know that humans stood their ground. That knowledge gives them strength to keep going. You fight for those who will come after you? We fight for everyone. For those who came before us and sacrificed, so we could exist. For those who stand beside us and need our support. For those who will come after us and inherit what we build. Vasquez gestured at herself. I am one human. I will live maybe another 30 years if I am lucky. But humanity will continue for thousands of years, maybe millions. What I do here matters not because of how it affects me, but because of how it affects all of them. Valeth sat in silence for a long moment. She had heard speeches about honor and duty before. Every species had their own version of such ideas, but there was something different about the way this human spoke. She was not reciting words she had been taught. She was expressing something she truly believed, something that lived in her bones. Those colony ships, Valeth said slowly. You do not know any of those people, do you? I have never met any of them, yet you are here risking your life for strangers. They are not strangers. Vasquez met her eyes with that same steady gaze. They are my people. Not because I know them, but because I have decided they are. Every human is my family, Your Highness. Every single one. And I will stand here in this room for as long as it takes to bring them home. The words hit Valeth like a physical blow. She understood now why the subsonic pulses had not worked, why the pheromones had failed, why all the standard techniques had no effect. This human was not operating on normal survival instincts. She was operating on something else entirely, something that the Thyrans had no equivalent for. The 40,000 people on those ships were not bargaining chips to Vasquez. They were not assets, or numbers, or strategic considerations. They were her family, chosen family, connected to her by nothing more than shared humanity, and she would die before she abandoned them. What if I refuse? Valeth asked. What if I send you away and keep those ships forever? Then I will find another way. Vasquez's voice was calm, certain. I will report back to my government, and they will send someone else. And when that person fails, they will send another. And another. We will not stop trying. We will never stop trying, even if it takes centuries. Even if it takes forever. Valeth looked at this small, fragile, impossible creature and felt the universe shift around her. She had conquered species that could crush mountains. Species that could survive in the vacuum of space. Species that could regenerate from a single cell. But she had never faced anything like this. She had never faced hope. That night, after the negotiations paused again, Valeth could not sleep. She lay in her royal chambers, surrounded by luxury that would have stunned most beings in the galaxy. But her mind kept returning to the human sitting alone in the crystal chamber below. Finally, she rose from her bed and walked to her private terminal. She entered her highest security codes and accessed the Dominion's classified archives on alien species. These files were restricted to only the royal family and the most senior military commanders. They contained information considered too disturbing or dangerous for general knowledge. She searched for humanity and found a file much larger than she had expected. Someone had been studying humans in great detail, and the findings had been marked with the highest warning levels. Valeth began to read, and what she found kept her awake until dawn. The first section covered human biology. Much of it she already knew. Humans were physically unremarkable. They were not particularly strong, fast, or durable compared to other species. They had no natural weapons, no protective shells, no ability to regenerate lost limbs. On paper, they should have been prey for everything else in the galaxy. but the report went deeper than surface analysis. It described how humans had survived on their homeworld, a planet that was actively trying to kill them. Earth had ice ages that covered continents in frozen death. It had diseases that wiped out massive portions of the population. It had predators, natural disasters, and extreme environments that should have eliminated such a fragile species long ago, yet humans survived. They survived by adapting, by learning, by refusing to accept that anything was impossible. When the cold came, they made fire and clothing. When disease struck, they developed medicine. When predators hunted them, they became hunters themselves. Every challenge that should have destroyed them instead made them stronger. The report noted something that Valeth found deeply unsettling. Humans did not just survive hardship. They seemed to seek it out. They climbed mountains that served no practical purpose. They ran distances that caused their bodies actual harm, and they did this for enjoyment. They consumed a chemical called capsaicin that triggered pain responses in their mouths. And they considered this a pleasant experience. This was not normal behavior for any species the Dominion had encountered. Most creatures avoided pain and discomfort instinctively, but humans had developed a relationship with suffering that bordered on alliance. They believed that pain made them stronger, and they were correct. The second section of the report covered human psychology. And this was where Violet found herself truly. Disturbed human bonding mechanisms were classified in the report as irrational persistent. This meant that humans formed emotional connections that defied logical analysis and refused to break under any circumstances. They did not just bond with their own offspring, which was common among many species. They bonded with strangers, with members of other species. Even with objects and ideas, a human could decide that someone mattered to them, and that decision would override every survival instinct they possessed. They would walk into certain death for a person they had met only once. They would sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor, justice, or love. They would endure any amount of pain to protect something they had chosen to care about. The report included a case study that made Valeth stop reading for several minutes. During a conflict with the Cylon Marauders, a human transport ship was captured with 200 civilians aboard. The Cylon commander offered to release them in exchange for strategic information that would have allowed the Marauders to attack coalition military bases. The human government refused the deal, knowing that the civilians would likely be killed. But the families of those civilians did not riot or protest. They supported the decision. They said they would rather their loved ones die with honor than have them saved through betrayal. 200 humans chose death over compromise, and their families agreed with that choice. Valeth had seen species sacrifice individuals for the greater good. That was common and logical. But she had never seen a species where the individuals themselves embraced that sacrifice willingly, even eagerly. The third section of the report discussed human history, and this was perhaps the most disturbing part of all. Humans had nearly destroyed themselves. Multiple times, they had invented weapons capable of ending all life on their planet, and they had actually used them on each other. They had wars that killed millions of their own kind. They had systems of cruelty and oppression that lasted for generations. By any reasonable measure, humanity should have wiped itself out long before reaching the stars. Their own destructive nature should have ended them, but it did not. Instead, they learned. It grew. They looked at their own darkest moments and decided to be better. Not because it was easy, not because it was in their nature, but because they chose to. They created something the report called hope, a belief that the future could be better than the past, despite all evidence to the contrary, and they spread that hope wherever they went. The report noted that human colonies were unusually stable and cooperative compared to colonies founded by other species. Humans had an almost supernatural ability to build communities, to find common ground with different beings. To create something larger than themselves, Valeth closed the file as the first light of dawn entered her chamber. She sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what she had read. The Thyran Dominion had built its empire on the belief that strength meant the power to destroy. They conquered because they could, because they were stronger than everyone else. It had never occurred to them that there might be another kind of strength, but humans had shown her something different. Their strength was not in their bodies or their weapons. It was in their ability to endure, to adapt, to hope. It was in their willingness to suffer for things that mattered. It was in their stubborn refusal to accept that anything was impossible. Valeth thought about Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez, sitting alone in the crystal chamber. That one woman represented everything that made humanity dangerous. Not because she could fight or kill, but because she would never, ever give up. She would sit there until she died if necessary, still hoping, still believing that she could save those 40,000 strangers, and Valeth realized, with a clarity that surprised her, that she did not want to be the enemy of such a species. The Thyrans might be able to defeat humans in battle, at least for a while, but they could never truly conquer them. You cannot conquer hope. You can only join it or be left behind. The princess rose from her chair and began preparing for what she knew would be the most important conversation of her life. She had made a decision, and it would change everything. The final session began as the sun rose over the Thyran capital. Golden light streamed through the crystal walls of the negotiation chamber, casting rainbow patterns across the floor. It was beautiful, but Valeth barely noticed. Her mind was focused entirely on what she was about to do. She entered the chamber alone. No advisors accompanied her. No guards stood at the doors. She had ordered everyone to stay away, knowing that what she planned to say would cause chaos if overheard. This conversation needed to happen between only two people. Vasquez was standing when she arrived. The human had been in this chamber for almost 2 full days now with only minimal food and water provided during the breaks. By all rights, she should have been exhausted, weakened, desperate. Instead, she looked exactly as she had at the beginning. Alert.com. Patient. Valeth did not sit on her elevated throne. Instead, she walked down the steps and stood at the same level as the human. It was a gesture that would have shocked her advisors. Thyran royalty never lowered themselves to the level of other species. But Valeth had decided that the old rules no longer applied. "I have been trying to understand you," she said. "Your species, your persistence. At first I thought it was stubbornness. A primitive survival instinct that made you too stupid to know when you were beaten." Vasquez said nothing. She simply waited, giving Valeth the space to continue. "Then I thought it might be arrogance. Perhaps humans simply believed they were better than everyone else, too proud to admit defeat. And now?" Vasquez asked. Valeth was silent for a moment, gathering her thoughts. What she was about to say went against everything she had been taught since childhood. It challenged the fundamental beliefs of her entire civilization. But she had spent the night reading about humanity, and she could no longer pretend that the old way was the only way. "Now I think it is something else entirely," she said. "You do not fight because you believe you will win. You fight because you believe the fighting matters. The outcome is secondary to the act itself." "You call it hope," Vasquez nodded slowly. "That is a good understanding. It is not logical." Valeth began to pace, a habit she had when thinking deeply. "It is not efficient. From a pure survival standpoint, it makes no sense. A logical species would calculate the odds of success and withdraw when those odds became unfavorable." "You are correct. It is not logical, but it works." Valeth stopped pacing and faced the human directly. "Your species has survived things that should have destroyed you. You have built a coalition that spans hundreds of worlds. You have created alliances with species that hated each other for millennia. And you did it not through force or manipulation, but through this strange thing called hope." "We have also made many mistakes," Vasquez said. "Hope does not make us perfect. It just makes us keep trying." "Yes." Valeth took a deep breath. "The colony ships will be released." Something changed in Vasquez's expression. It was subtle, barely visible, but Valeth saw it. A slight softening around the eyes, a tiny release of tension in the shoulders. For the first time, the human allowed herself to feel something other than perfect control. "All 40,000 civilians will be returned to your coalition unharmed," Valeth continued. "They will be given supplies for their journey and safe passage through our territory." "Thank you, Your Highness," Vesca's voice was quiet, almost gentle. On behalf of every person on those ships, thank you. Do not thank me yet. Beleth's crest pulsed with a color she had never displayed before. It was not the violet of dominance or the red of aggression. It was a deep blue, a color that in Thyran culture represented equals acknowledging each other. I want something in return. Vesca straightened slightly. Name your terms. Teach us. The word hung in the air between them. Vesca's eyebrows rose slightly, the first real surprise she had shown. Teach you? The Thyran Dominion has conquered half the galaxy, Valeth said. We have the largest military force, the most advanced weapons, the greatest warriors. But we are tired. Every world we conquer must be held by force. Every species we dominate hates us. Our empire requires constant vigilance because everyone is waiting for us to show weakness. She paused, looking at the human with new eyes. Your coalition is smaller than our dominion, but it is not tired. Your members do not hate each other. They work together not because they are forced to, but because they choose to. You have built something that we have never managed to create. Community, Vasquez said softly. Yes, community, connection, the belief that others matter. Even strangers, even people you have never met. Valeth spread her hands in a gesture of openness. I read about your history last night, about the terrible things you have done to each other. Wars, slavery, genocide, by any measure. Your species should have destroyed itself long ago. We almost did. Several times. But you did not. You looked at your worst moments and decided to be better. You chose to change. Beleth's voice held something it had never held before. Uncertainty. Vulnerability. Can you teach us how to make that choice? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. She studied the princess with those calm, brown eyes. And Valeth felt as if she was being evaluated not as a ruler or an enemy, but as a person. It was a strange and uncomfortable feeling. It will not be easy, Vasquez said finally. Change never is. Your people will resist. They will say you are weak for wanting peace instead of conquest. They will try to stop you. I know, it will take time. Generations, maybe. You will not see the full results in your lifetime. I know that too. Vasquez smiled. It was a real smile this time, warm and genuine, transforming her plain face into something almost beautiful. Then yes, we will teach you. We will share everything we know about building communities instead of empires, about cooperation instead of conquest, about hope. Valeth felt something shift inside her. It was strange and frightening and wonderful all at once. For the first time in her 200 years of life, she was not thinking about what she could take or control. She was thinking about what she could build. There is one more thing, Vasquez said. This will only work if you truly want it. Not because it is strategic or logical, but because you believe it is right. Hope cannot be forced. It has to be chosen. Valeth considered this. She thought about her life, about the endless wars and conquests and struggles for power. She thought about the fear in the eyes of every species she had ever dominated. She thought about the loneliness of being at the top of a pyramid. It's built on force. And then she thought about the 40,000 strangers on those colony ships. People she had never met and would probably never meet. She thought about how one human had been willing to die for them simply because she had decided they mattered. I choose it, Valeth said. I choose hope. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez, who had sat motionless for 2 days, who had faced down an alien princess without flinching, who had carried the weight of 40,000 lives on her shoulders, reached out and offered her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Valeth took it. Their hands clasped. Two species that had been strangers now taking the first step toward something new. Behind them, the crystal walls of the chamber began to glow with the soft blue light of understanding. This is going to take a while, Vasquez said. Hope you are patient. Beleth laughed. It surprised them both. The sound was strange in her throat, unfamiliar, but not unpleasant. She could not remember the last time she had laughed from genuine joy rather than mockery or triumph. I'm learning, she said. In the years that followed, Historians would mark this moment as the beginning of a new era. The Thyran-Human Accords would reshape galactic politics, not through conquest or intimidation, but through something far more powerful: understanding. Species that had been enemies for millennia would find common ground. Worlds that had been oppressed would gain freedom. The galaxy would slowly, painfully, hopefully begin to change. And it all started with one soldier who refused to give up, and one princess who was brave enough to choose a different path. Hope, it turned out, was contagious. And once it started spreading, nothing in the universe could stop it.